Welcome to Zoom In, Zoom Out, where we take an in-depth look at how news from around the world is impacting Taiwan. I'm your host, Payne. It's Juneteenth, signifying the emancipation of enslaved people in the United States in 1865, and Black American communities are celebrating this event from around the world, including Taiwan. And today we're joined by the organizers of the Juneteenth event, Toy and Casey. Toy and Casey, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
To start off, can you tell us a little bit about what Juneteenth is?
Yeah, sure. So Juneteenth commemorates the day that the last of the Black people were freed from slavery. So on June 19th, 1865, the Union troops marched into Galveston, Texas. This is the last place that still enslaved people, where they announced that the Black people were free from slavery. And this was 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. Yes, this was signed into law, but that did not mean like it was enforced like automatically and that all the people were freed from slavery. And so it took the Union troops to march through the southern states to actually free everyone. And so Juneteenth became a celebration the following year, and it has been celebrated every year since. And so, yeah, it's a great holiday. And 2 years ago, it became a federal holiday in the United States.
Yes, I remember Joe Biden signing that proclamation to make it a federal holiday. So, what does Juneteenth mean for the both of you, and has that meaning changed now since you're outside of the United States?
Juneteenth to me, when I was younger, my father would take me to the Juneteenth every year. Take me to the Juneteenth parties that would go on Martin Luther King Boulevard in Milwaukee. And so initially, Juneteenth was like, as a young kid, it was just a celebration kind of party, people dancing, music, food. But as I got older and learned the history of Juneteenth, it became a really important day to commemorate and reflect on the history of African Americans.
So, some people might think it's strange to celebrate Juneteenth in Taiwan, but why do you think it's important to celebrate this day in this country?
Well, one, it's important because visibility. Like there are Black people here in Taiwan, and it's important to understand our culture. A lot of American culture and Black American culture, such as hip hop, fashion, things like that, have an influence here in Taiwan, but a lot of people do not understand or know a lot about the Black history, which is also American history. And so here in Taiwan, it's important to understand like the fight for freedom is still happening. Like we still have to make our voices heard about the discrimination and about some of our experiences, whether in the United States or elsewhere. And I would like to add, within the context of Taiwan, there will be an educational aspect because a lot of people don't know what Juneteenth is. So we will have a historical aspect, but then we will also commemorate the third year for the BLM rally that took place here in Taipei almost exactly 3 years ago to the day.
What is your experiences of being a Black person in Taiwan, especially like living and working here for so many years?
For the most part, they've been positive, but I've had some negative instances living here, especially when I go back. I got here in 2002 the first time, and when I go back that far, I have a quick story about, I was working at a school. I didn't want to work there anymore, so I started bringing in teachers for them to, to take over my position, teachers they could hire. And I brought one teacher in who was very experienced. His demo was great, and when he leaves, I asked my boss, I'm like, oh, what about this guy? He was perfect. She goes, oh no, he's Black. I go, I'm Black. And she goes, not that Black. So I got to experience this kind of colorism and prejudice against Black people. But for the most part, my time here in Taiwan has been well, but there are instances like that pop up.
For me, I feel like Taiwan is quite safe, especially compared to back home, where we can walk around the street at all times of day or night and feel safe and comfortable. We don't have the police brutality here. Like the police are very friendly and helpful here. But I mean, there are some of the microaggressions also, such as like people wanting to just touch my hair without asking, when it's very like our hair is very personal to us, and there's a lot of history behind our hair when it comes to the American context and American society.
So in American society, there's a lot of police brutality, voting laws, segregation. Do you think that there are these structural racism problems in Taiwan?
Not so much for me as a foreigner, but I know Taiwan has their own issue with migrant workers, for example, aren't treated well, don't have a lot of the same protections that I have as a foreign resident.
I will agree. Like, I would say it's more so even the fact that we are considered foreigners versus migrant workers, the Southeast Asians, that should not be a distinction. Like anyone that is not a citizen or a citizen, that should be a distinction. But yeah, migrant workers they don't have very many rights or protections according to the law here in Taiwan. But as Black people, we do have a privilege, especially with an American passport. We do recognize we have privilege.
Talking about migrant workers, we saw that 3 years ago, the Black Lives Matter movement in Taiwan involved Indigenous people, migrant workers. I talked to one of your movement's members, Gani Oyedele, to understand how these are all connected. So let's take a look. 55-year-old Nigerian Gani Oyedele has lived in Taiwan for 11 years. He has a Taiwanese wife and 2 children. When he's not teaching English to students, he writes and directs his own plays.
Back of this thing. We're taking this to Black 3.
When Black American George Floyd was killed in May of 2020 during an arrest, it sparked protests across the United States against police brutality. Across the world in Taipei, Oyedele wanted to do his part to raise awareness, organizing a rally to also highlight the racism faced by people in Taiwan.
I was on the MRT, I was on the lift with my family once, and this old woman walked in, and she was talking to my wife, and my wife was very happy. I was like, get your room, guys. And then when she was about to leave, she said something, and my wife was all blue, sad, and I was like, what's wrong? She said, the woman said, it's a pity the boy is Black. He's going to suffer.
That incident led to the birth of the Black Lives Matter movement in Taiwan. They worked to spread information meant to combat prejudice against Black people and other minorities. And they're also fighting to bring attention to the issues of Taiwanese indigenous peoples and Southeast Asian migrant workers. Taiwan has a population of nearly 24 million people. 97% are Han, 600,000 people are indigenous, and 700,000 people are migrant workers, mostly from Southeast Asia, but only about 1,000 are of African descent. So, we're talking about migrant workers. We saw that 3 years ago, the Black Lives Matter movement in Taiwan involved Indigenous people, migrant workers. How were you trying to collaborate with other minority groups in?
Well, during the planning process, I was talking with one of my friends, John Paul, about the planning process, and she was telling me, like, you have to include Indigenous people, because my friend John Paul, she is a Haitian American Indigenous person, and so she was like, Taiwan is a country on Indigenous people land. And I did my own research knowing like, okay, Taiwan does have 16 recognized Indigenous groups here. And so a friend of ours, Besu, he put us in contact with other Indigenous people that he's friends with, and got to talking and really understanding their experiences. And we have quite a lot of similarities in terms of the discrimination in our home countries, in terms of like, if you have darker skin, you're discriminated against, and there's negative stereotypes that people assume and place on you. And so when it came to planning the schedule and who we wanted to speak, we agreed to have Savuna and Besu and a group of their friends who are all Indigenous people from various tribes, doing a partnership and wanting their voice to be heard alongside ours, because again, a lot of people may not think like our problems matter to other people, but there is a level of discrimination against the Indigenous people here. So they should be heard, they should be seen and understood also.
Yeah, I love that. Either we all aren't free or we all are free.
Yes, exactly.
And I mean, even in the U.S., there's a history of the Native Americans helping blacks who escaped slavery, and they would build new communities with them. So, like the indigenous populations of any place are an important part of the struggle for freedom, because indigenous people. They've lost their land, they've lost their way of life all around the world,
For sure. All the displacement and dispossession and even genocide that happens with indigenous people in all of these countries, including Taiwan. So you mentioned a very important word, freedom. I think that links to liberation. What do you think it takes to liberate people of color and minorities from structural racism in the United States?
Well, to liberate people of color and other minority groups, one, it takes creating space for these different groups of people to express themselves, to make their voices heard, to feel safe and comfortable in whatever country or space that they're in. And then two, I would say acknowledgement of our experiences, of the history and what our people have gone through to get to this point, and then what still needs to be done to create equity and equality. And then I would say three, people of the majority group have to advocate for us also. We can advocate for ourselves all we want, but true freedom and liberty doesn't happen when it's only the minority. It has to be everyone that is fighting for this equality.
So looking forward, how do you plan to keep on organizing and build up community?
Well, over the last few years, I've created events called Community Combos, which is a series of events that is focused on having difficult discussions, creating a safe space for people to voice their opinions on topics on racism, gender issues, Indigenous people's rights, health and mental health, LGBTQ issues. And so once a month we meet up and talk about a particular issue. So this month's community combo will be a follow-up to the Juneteenth celebration, and we will discuss freedom. Like, are we truly free? What does freedom mean to you? And that series has been going on for 3 years now. And that's just one example, but we continue to create more events and center our brothers and sisters, whether Black or Indigenous, people who are marginalized, and then continuing the dialogue online also is important. But for me personally, I prefer in person. That's where you really get to connect with people. A little bit gets lost online, like tone and that connection.
What about you, Casey? What do you think?
For me, I will continue to support and help Toy create new events, but I don't know if or when I'll start it, but I do like the idea of having maybe a monthly gathering of some kind for the Black community, just to talk and socialize and
support one another.
Yeah.
That's great. I love that you both are doing this activism in Taiwan. I will support you all the way on the sidelines, but also using my voice to help you make your voice be heard as well. So, Toy and Casey, that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much for joining this program. This has been Zoom In and Zoom Out. You can find TaiwanPlus on Facebook and Twitter, and we'll see you next time.